All right, big hello to everybody. My name is Gene Bunin. For those not aware, it is currently 11 o'clock and 11:07 at night, 11:08 in Almaty, Kazakhstan. And I am here, I am in good health, and I am recording this video on my own free will, regardless what Western media might tell you. Now, the reason I'm recording this video, which is very unusual for me, I think people who read what I write or generally follow what I do probably know that I don't really record videos, I just write. And I would prefer to write. And here I'm going to make a sort of rare exception. Hopefully this is the first time I'm doing a video address. Hopefully it's the last time. And I'm doing it to sort of try to convey the importance of what's happening right now. Here in Kazakhstan, in Almaty, and also in Astana, regarding the volunteer group Atajurt and its leader Serikjan Bilash, whom, as many of you know, has been arrested. So I guess I probably don't need to really fill people in on the details here. I think if you just read the news, if you Google Kazakhstan activists, you'll see all the stories, and they do a pretty good job of covering what happened. But basically, on Saturday, so about a week ago, there were people at the Atajurt office who looked a bit sketchy, and this put the volunteers there ill at ease, and so much ill at ease, in fact, that Serikjan thought that his life was in danger, and he went to a hotel that night, a nice hotel, but still in the middle of the night, members of the security apparatus broke into his room, took him all the way to Astana. They flew him all the way across Kazakhstan to Astana, and where there was some sort of very quick process, and then they released him to basically house arrest. And they're charging him with extremism, calling to jihad, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm not going to sum all of this up. I'll comment on it later. It's not the goal of the video, is not to really give you an update on the news. The goal of this video really is to, there's a few goals. The first, I guess, is that the major goal is that it's a sort of plea. So I'm going to use this chance to try to explain to you why I think Atajurt is an incredibly important group, while in fact I think it's not exaggerating to say it is the most important group in the world today with regards to this Xinjiang issue, with regards to all of these human rights atrocities that are happening in Xinjiang today, and why they're so vital, and why we should really do everything we can to try to not lose them, because at the moment things are bad enough that there's a chance that we might lose them. I'm making this video address basically to try to convey this in a way that perhaps written words do not convey. I could always write, but then you don't get to see me in all of my elastic kind of form, so hopefully this gives it an extra edge. But of course, if you don't feel like listening to me talk, which I hope it's not going to take very long, but okay, it might, because you don't see it, but I have an outline here of things that I want to talk about. If you don't want to just sit and listen to me blah 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 for all of this time, there will also be a transcript. You can just look through the transcript if you want, or search through the transcript if you want. But basically, I want to do three major things. One is I want to kind of do a very quick, brief look at this whole Xinjiang fiasco since it started, let's say, in I guess late 2016, which is when a lot of things changed for a lot of people. I want to look at that, but I want to kind of do a review of all of that, and to put things into context, and why, where does Atajurt figure in, where does Serikjan Bilash figure in, why it's all kind of important. And then I'll go and I want to actually introduce Atajurt. So I want to talk about their history, how they formed, based on what I know, at least from interviewing or talking with them. And this is a group that I've known personally since now I think June or July of last year, and I've been working with them closely. So I don't know all of their quote-unquote secrets. I don't know how everything in that group works, but I still know quite a bit about them, and I can kind of give my perspective on it. And I would also like to argue for why they're important, in the sense of by reviewing everything that they've done up to the present day, and which I think has actually been a lot. And I don't think I don't think a lot of people realize just how much these people have done. It's really quite amazing, which is part of what makes them unique, especially given the fact that these are Kazakhstan citizens in Kazakhstan operating, in a fairly authoritarian country, doing all of this, which is quite amazing as well. So I'll go over that as well. And finally, I want to talk about Serikjan, who also I've been personally acquainted with since, so I guess also June, July of last year, who I would not say is a very close friend, but still is a friend, is somebody I've been talking to regularly for quite a while, is certainly an ally in against all of this crap that's happening in Xinjiang right now. And so I want to talk about him. I want to try to give my, I don't want to say, I don't want to judge the guy, but I want to kind of give you my impression of him, and of what I think, are probably not his not so great points, which he will have, and what points that I think that I admire, that I think are very good. And he's a very complicated figure. If you know him, it's very easy to love him or to hate him, or both. It's you can go between the two. He's a very kind of bright figure, and that's that's the natural thing. So having said all that, I want to do just a very quick review now of Xinjiang. So what's been happening in Xinjiang since basically Chunchwango came, and how has Atajurt and how has Kazakhstan figured into all of this. So it's actually interesting because you can break up what's been happening into about maybe 6 different stages, or I don't know, 6 paradigms. So the first I'll just say is pre-Chunchwango, so before he came. So that would be before roughly the fall of 2016. So that's kind of when things were quasi-normal. So again, quasi-normal, I mean, there were obviously problems back then as well, as those of us who have lived there know. But at the same time, it was still, people weren't getting put in camps. You could talk to your Uyghur friends freely, more or less. In a lot of cases, you could live with your Uyghur friends back then, which quickly became impossible after Chunchwango. So then, after he came to power in Xinjiang, there was kind of this period from the fall of 2016 to the spring of 2017, and that's when kind of the foundations were laid for what would happen later and what is happening now, which is kind of the detention. So back then, one of the first things he did is he confiscated. Everybody had their passports confiscated, so people who could normally leave Xinjiang could no longer leave Xinjiang. So that was one of the things, and then a lot of police were hired. So Xinjiang was effectively transformed into a police state with police and cameras and everything everywhere, really, really quickly, kind of to the absurd. So that was until maybe the spring of 2017, and then from the spring of 2017, you have another half-year period to the fall of 2017, where you kind of have this blitz offensive from the government. So that's when people started getting detained, and that's when a lot of people started getting put into these camps. And that was kind of a period of ignorance also for a lot of us who lived there, who knew people from there. Even though we knew that something was happening, it was hard to really understand what exactly was happening. It was hard to understand for the people who lived there, for the locals to understand what was happening. A lot of people thought that, okay, people are getting detained, but it's probably just a temporary thing. Maybe they'll crack down, they'll detain some people for a few months, then they'll let them go. As now time has shown, some people detained then have never been let go. Some people detained then have simply died in police custody. That's happened as well. So it was a period of ignorance for us because there wasn't a lot of coverage at the time either. So up until the fall of 2017, the world didn't really know what was happening there. I mean, even those of us who knew the region pretty well didn't know what was happening there. And then you have this next kind of paradigm, this next stage from the fall of 2017 to the spring of 2018, and that's when things started getting covered. And so here I came very well prepared. I've been very tech savvy. I have some printouts. And so here I'm just going to go through some of the media reports from that time that I think were kind of the seminal media reports that really broke this issue. And now we're talking fall of 2017 to spring of 2018, so this is almost a full year after Chunchwango came to power, about half a year after people have been getting detained en masse. And so at this point now, from again the fall of 2017 to the spring of 2018, now we're actually getting media coverage. And so some of the kind of good articles from this time are, first and foremost, I would heavily recommend. I don't think this article has been read or shared or talked about nearly as much as it should be, but it's by Nathan Vanderclip from the Globe and Mail. It's and it's, I think, the first one that came out, and it wrote kind of almost about everything. It wrote about the camp. It wrote about what regular life was like in Xinjiang already by the end of 2017. So this came out in the September of 2017. Highly recommended. Then, of course, you have the another very famous article by Megha Rajagopalan, whose name I can never get right, even though she's written at least 3 very good articles about Xinjiang by now. And this was the one that kind of, whereas Nathan's kind of captured everything, this one really looked at Kashgar and really looked at, not specifically at the camps, though it also mentioned the camps, but it looked kind of at the surveillance, at the fear. It also captured quite a lot. And then we also had this article by Emily Thun in the Financial Times, which is also captured a lot. I mean, basically the same stuff, that there were now camps, that people were getting detained. She mentioned that almost everybody she had talked to had a relative in the camps, which showed just how widespread this was. And then, so now, kind of, we enter. That was the fall of the fall and winter. Let's say the end of 2017. Now as we enter the start of 2018, we also had good reports coming out academically. So we had, this good paper by Adrian Zenz, as well as his other work, where he really started to look at the government spending and the camp system financially, and kind of finding pieces of proof that showed that there were government tenders that called for camps to be built and all of these things. And so that was also very useful. And then there was an actual really useful piece from Foreign Policy, which was kind of a luck piece, in the sense that this was about an Uyghur student studying in the US who went to China I believe this was, early 2017. He was detained in Beijing. He was taken all the way to Xinjiang. He was not in a camp, but he was in a detention center, a control cell. And that also kind of gave, it gave a view of how crazy things had gotten. But it also, it kind of gave a sense of how bad the conditions were. So again, it was really nothing about the camp. So these articles kind of formed the contours of what was happening. And then we shift now from spring 2018 to another half a year period to fall of 2018. And this is when we actually start to get really good coverage of the camps. And this is also where Atajurt essentially comes into play, as I'll mention later. So here, now we have basically 3 really big articles that I've selected. So the first was this one, the very famous one from AP, featuring Omer Bekkali and his experience, as well as Kairat Samarkand's experience. And so these were both Kazakh citizens who had gone back to Xinjiang and gotten detained. Then we kind of got another really interesting story with Saira Gul Saudbai. So this is a woman who had worked as an instructor in one of the camps. She used to be a kindergarten manager, I think, or a teacher, I forget which, or director, I think. And she was forced to go and teach at a camp, and then at one point she actually managed to flee to Kazakhstan illegally, and then she had a trial of whether or not to extradite her back to Kazakhstan, and she was not extradited. And so this particular article was from the Washington Post by Emily Rauhala, whose name I also might be messing up. And this one covered not only her trial, which at that point had still not been resolved, but also testimonies from 2 other ex-detainees, Orhanbek Köksebek and Amanjan Seytuli. So at this point now you had 4 ex-detainees, all from Kazakhstan, all Kazakh citizens who had gotten detained while going back to Xinjiang or to China, and who had talked about the camps specifically, and how the camps were not really study schools. They were not, boarding schools, but they were actual, almost prison-like internment camps. And then finally, there was an excellent report that I encourage everybody to read by Human Rights Watch, and this is called Eradicating Ideological Viruses. And this is another report that relied very, very heavily on Kazakhstan. If you read it, you will see that it's basically, in the majority, a lot of the information comes from Kazakhstan, especially regarding the conditions of the camps. And this one also talks quite a lot about the conditions of the camps themselves. So now kind of we're in this, again, period from spring 2018 to the fall of 2018, fall of last year, when we're actually getting to see now what the camps are actually like. And so now we're no longer ignorant. At this point, we have sufficient coverage. We know not only what's happening in Xinjiang just from going to Xinjiang and observing it, but we actually know what's happening inside the detention facilities that the government says either don't exist or are vocational training centers. And so now we finally enter what is probably the current stage, but which we might be leaving soon. And the current stage, so this is from the fall of last year to now, let's say. And this is actually the stage of action. So this is now when we have sufficient information, we can hold China accountable in many ways, and this is when people are starting to take action. And this action is taking form in a lot of ways. It's, you have the kind of the government bodies. So if you have, the United Nations now, this is when the United Nations has now been speaking out and openly criticizing China, what it's doing. And now the Xinjiang issue is no longer as much as underreported as before. And now people are actually paying attention, and there's almost daily articles coming about Xinjiang now everywhere. And so that's one facet. The other facet is now the activism is getting more active in the sense that Atajurt is also expanding at the sense there's more testimonies, there's more stories, there's more videos. My own project, Shahid.biz, is already launched in the fall of 2018, and so now we're collecting testimonies. We're documenting all of the victims in Xinjiang. And people across, Europe, the U.S., Australia are holding workshops. They're getting together. They're speaking out. People are writing petitions. People are making demands. China is actually starting to show concessions at this point in reply to all of this pressure and opening up, quote unquote, opening it up its centers to foreign diplomats and foreign reporters who, so unfortunately, are not so very independent as of now, but still better than nothing, and actually also letting some people, notably the Kazakhs, out of the camps and even back to Kazakhstan. So now we're in a stage where all of this pressure, all of what people are doing is actually yielding some results. But now we come to this point where, what next? Are we going to continue? Is this pressure going to keep mounting? Or is China going to effectively shut it down and continue its counter propaganda, counter PR campaign to basically undo what's been done? And so that's the question I leave open for now. What now? Because a lot of these past two stages that I talked about, first the coverage of the camps, and now more recently kind of the more increased activism, Atajurt is, and now we'll come to Atajurt. Atajurt has been responsible for a lot of this. And if now Atajurt's existence is in question, if it might not continue to exist, if there is no such a group that you can, that can speak out so loudly and so effectively against what's happening in China, where does that leave us? Are we able to recover from this, or are we going to, suffer a big loss? And I will come back to this question at the end. But for now, I actually want to talk about Atajurt, finally. So what is Atajurt? Atajurt is basically, and here I have to I'll give a quick summary of the history of Atajurt. So it's basically, it started out, let's say, with these three guys, or I think, I know it definitely started out with these two guys. I think this guy was there as well. So this is Serikjan Bilash, this is Kairat Baitullah, and this is Kader Ali Oraz. Kader Ali is no longer in Atajurt, but Serikjan, well, we know he's the one in the headlines. Kairat is kind of one of the major assistants. And it's a group that started small and has actually, gotten quite, let's say, big. So these are not all, group members, but this is just kind of a photo after one of their busy days. But there's volunteers here. There's also victims' relatives here. And it's a group that started small in 2016, at the end of 2016. And here I'm just I'm summarizing what Kader Ali Oraz told me. when I interviewed him last summer about the group. And so, this is basically based on his information, but I'm just going to kind of report it. So according to him, the group started in late 2016, and they said it was because they received a leaked document from Xinjiang that basically said, I'm not sure what it was exactly, it might have been that thing about only having one ethnicity by 2020 or something like that, but basically they understood that things were going to get bad. And in response to this, they kind of organized informally, and they started working to try to help Kazakhs from Xinjiang to move to Kazakhstan. So they set up these WeChat groups for, I think, one for every county and one for every prefecture. And they were basically encouraging Kazakh families in Xinjiang to move to Kazakhstan as soon as possible. And so they were actually going around Kazakhstan, kind of finding plots of land that the government was ready to just kind of give away to whoever wanted to go move there. They were taking photos of it, they were kind of putting up ads for it, and they were just kind of trying to get people to move. And at the end, according to Qadar Ali, they managed actually to get 67 families out before, this became very hard and the border kind of closed for a lot of people, and before people started getting detained. And then people started getting detained, and so the group kind of started naturally shifted to trying to deal with this and to petitioning to trying to kind of get these people out. And at one point, I think it was May 2017, maybe it's 2018, but I think it was May 2017, that they actually tried, to organize some relatives to, with a bunch of relatives relatives of victims to kind of go to the Chinese embassy and kind of demand answers, to ask what's happening. And as Qadar Ali told me, that day it didn't work out because the Chinese never actually met with them. They never received them. So I think they said they would, they never did, and they basically kind of left by the back door. And he said that it was basically that other overseas Chinese group, Jiabiao, that helped the Chinese kind of representatives get out by the back door. And I think there was another event with the National World, Kazakh Council that year that kind of, that was a disappointment for Atajurt. And so they basically decided that the current organizations, the current groups that were supposed to represent the rights of Kazakhs were not actually doing that. They were not asking China the difficult questions. It was a lot of formalities, and so that prompted them to formally create their group. And so then I guess now we're kind of in late 2017 at this point, and so or early 2018, and so this is maybe like mid 2017 to mid 2018. So what's happening now is Atajurt is still a relatively unknown small group, and they are working to occasionally, collect these video testimonies, though again, very kind of informal, filmed with cell phones, for example. They're going around and kind of going around to different towns where, in Kazakhstan, maybe small towns where, Kazakhs with relatives who may be detained in Xinjiang live, but who don't know how to talk about that, who don't know how to speak out. And so they're going there and they're interviewing them, they're talking to them, they're trying to get them to petition for their rights and to kind of to get the Kazakh Ministry of Foreign Affairs to do something about their relatives in Xinjiang. So they do that. They provide general social assistance. So they do several, like things like volunteer drives, volunteer work. I don't know all the details here, but basically helping raise money for families who are struggling, for example, because they're, like the father of the family goes back to Xinjiang, gets detained, and now the mother and her kids are left in Kazakhstan. And if they were relying on the father for, to provide the financial support for the family, now they can't do that anymore, and so they're in trouble. And so I think they also did social assistance of this sort, so they would help people, they would help these families. And they would also help with media. They would fix for media. So I think they've helped a lot. They helped Azatik, the Kazakh branch of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. They would help them, but then they would start helping foreign media as well, and that's kind of where the AP News story with Omar Bek Ali first came out. It was through Atajurt's help, and so they do this for a while, and so until then, in the summer of last year, the summer of 2018, we get this case with Sairagul. So Sairagul Saudbai flees to Kazakhstan and is now being tried for illegally crossing the border. And Atajurt now is actively, starts to actively campaign for her. and they raise awareness for her case. They go around Kazakhstan, they shoot videos of people saying freedom for Sarah Gul, so they raise kind of the local, they put on the local pressure, but they also do quite a lot to get foreign reporters involved. And as someone who went to, I think, all but one of Sarah Gul trial sessions, I mean, I could say that, I can testify to that. They did quite a lot to get reporters involved, to invite reporters, to invite, kind of foreign faces to come to this trial and to put pressure that way. So they did quite a lot for her to cover the trial, to put pressure on the government not to return her back to China. So then Sarah Gul's trial ends, and this is now, I think we're talking August 1st of 2018. And then things kind of get a bit awkward. So Soli Abdebinova, a journalist who had worked for Atajurt, and Abzal Kuspan, who was Sarah Gul's lawyer, they break with Atajurt. So they had all been working together before, now they break. And Sarah Gul, Saleh and Abzal basically say that Sarah Gul now should not talk to any. This is after she kind of gets the positive verdict in her favor, so she could technically talk to reporters, but they basically quarantine her. They say, her lawyer says, and Saleh, they say that she shouldn't talk to anybody. Atajurt is completely against this. Atajurt wants Sarah Gul to give a press conference as soon as possible, and basically to say everything she knows about the camps as soon as possible, as a way of protecting her. That's their logic. Her lawyer is against this. He said, no, she will get reported back to China. She should not say anything, And so they basically quarantined Sarah Gul, which is a quarantine that has lasted in many ways up to the present day, because Sarah Gul still has not talked in depth about the camps, and has openly said that she doesn't feel safe doing that, because she does feel like there's always a threat of deportation, and she has not been given refugee status in Kazakhstan still. So kind of after Sarah Gul's trial, you have this month of kind of awkwardness where Atajurt is trying to kind of get Sarah Gul out of this quote-unquote quarantine. Sarah Gul has basically disappeared. She seems to be completely under control of Saleh and Abzal, and Atajurt tries to fight for that, but ultimately gives up and goes back to recording video testimonies. And so they start recording video testimonies, and this is kind of the Atajurt that most of us know today, is by all these YouTube videos of Serikjan, as well as others, speaking in lots of different languages with relatives of victims. And so that starts roughly in, say, late August, September 2018, that they really start doing that. And it's mostly at the beginning, it's really Serikjan sitting and talking in Mandarin, Kazakh, and English on camera to all of these relatives, and doing lots of these 10 to 20 interviews a day. And at this point, Atajurt has gotten quite famous, in part because of Sarah Gul's trial, because they came to prominence after that. And so there's actually a lot of people visiting the Atajurt office at this point and recording these videos, helping Atajurt, giving their petitions to Atajurt, so Atajurt can direct them to the government, etc., etc. Then in, I think, October or something like October, November, there's a sort of fallout. Kader Ali Oraz, so one of the founders of Atajurt, basically gets, I guess, is forced to leave on something, or chooses to leave. I'm not sure. I don't want to go into the politics of it. But he basically leaves Atajurt. So now Atajurt becomes mostly under Serikjan Bilash's control, as well as all of these other volunteers. And at this point, there's a lot of expansion. So from like the end of 2018 now to the present day, we see this huge expansion of Atajurt. So now they are, they get a new office with multiple rooms where they can shoot video interviews, in one language in this room and another language in this room. They have more volunteers, and now they're doing multilingual, testimonies. They're not just doing, it's not just Serikjan anymore doing Kazakh, Mandarin, English, but it's now, they have a Turkish-speaking volunteer who does, Turkish and Kazakh. They have an Uyghur guy, Sedirjan, who speaks Arabic, and so he does an Arabic and Kazakh. He does those videos. They have, later they also have Mehmet Volkan, who's a good friend and also an Atajurt volunteer. And he's also Turkish, and so he's also doing videos in Turkish and English and Kazakh, trilingual. Then sometimes they have people who do it with French and Kazakh. They have people who, again, do English. They now start doing them more in Russian. So they're covering like 7 or 8 languages at this point. And I don't know if how effective that was, but still, it makes all of these testimonies and all these stories available, accessible to a lot of people with a lot of different linguistic backgrounds. And so, in terms of media-wise too, so the end of last year, the beginning of this year sees kind of Atajurt becomes a sort of a node. So almost all of the reporters in the world, or I guess all the big news agencies in the world, when they come to report on Kazakhstan, they go through Atajurt. It often ends up working this way. And so, CNN, BBC, Guardian, ABC, the Australian ABC, HBO, Vice, I mean, whatever, all of these outlets, AFP, AP, blah, 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 all of them have people who know Atajurt, because Atajurt is just, they've become a node of connecting reporters who want to come to Kazakhstan and report about these issues with local witnesses, so either relatives of victims in Xinjiang or ex-detainees. And so they play a crucial role in that. And also the YouTube channel also is at this point is getting very famous. So I think early this year, at one point I had 50,000 subscribers, and there were days when I was getting 1,000 subscribers every day. And I think now it's up to like 70 or 80,000 subscribers at this point. And then we reach today when Serikjan gets arrested, the Atajurt office is sealed, and it's not 100% clear what is going to happen next. So that's kind of, there I give you the more or less the outline, the timeline of Atajurt and how they operated. Now, what Atajurt has done for the Xinjiang issue, again, as I said, it's actually quite a lot. I'm going to argue for why it's quite a lot, and I've come prepared with arguments that I hope will be good. First, I think they've played an instrumental role in covering, again, as I said, the camps. So a lot of, again, if you look at the Human Rights Watch report, you will see, I think, that at the beginning they say something like 2/3 or maybe 3/4 of their information came from Kazakhs. And it came essentially through Atajurt, because Atajurt is kind of at the center, and they meet with all these people, and they have all the contacts, and they put them in touch. And so a lot of that is a lot of the coverage is due to them. There's also, so for example, again, like I said, so this story of Membek Ali was also basically, it was fixed by Atajurt. And again, the Human Rights Watch report, a lot of the information inside also came from the same people that Atajurt knows. So they play a crucial role in getting information about the camps out, and not just through the ex-detainees, but also just through all of these videos that they do, because different relatives also hear different things from people they know in Xinjiang about what's going on, and so all of this information becomes available. They also played an important role locally. So there was an interesting case with students, so Chinese Kazakhs who were studying in Almaty, who at one point last summer decided they were too afraid to go back to Xinjiang, because they heard there was about 80 of them, and they heard that there was about 90 students who had gone back and basically disappeared. So either they had their passports confiscated, or they were actually taken to camps. And so there was about 80 of these students who chose not to go back, and Atajurt basically helped them stay in Kazakhstan over the summer. They rented a house just a little bit outside of Almaty, not far from the train station, where these people could stay, kind of a sort of a dorm setting for these students that was inexpensive. They tried to set them up with things to do, with classes, with Russian classes, English language classes, and here I also helped out a bit, and so I also found a few volunteers. So Alex and Joseph, thank you again for coming and helping teach them English for a few sessions. That was really cool of you guys. So Atajurt helped those students as well to not return to Xinjiang and to stay and to do the paperwork to also get Kazakhstan citizenship in some cases. Again, they helped a lot with Sayragul's trial. They rally a lot of people to attend, to just come on the last day of Serikjan's trial. If you look at the pictures, you look at the media, there's tons of people. Most of those people were not in the courtroom, they were just outside the courthouse, just kind of waiting and just being there for emotional support. And those people were essentially rallied by Atajurt. And they also helped a lot, in getting foreign attention to this trial. And I think that did also have a big effect, and it's it's hard to obviously prove, but a number of people, locals, had told me that if you guys hadn't been there as foreigners, our government could have just ignored all of this and could have sent her back to China, because then they wouldn't feel this international pressure. So Atajurt helped in that regard as well. They've also helped by applying continuously all of this public pressure on the situation, not only on their own government, but also on the Chinese authorities. And there's actually, in here, when I mean public pressure, I mean in many ways through these online videos, these YouTube videos that we see online. It seems like a very kind of simple, silly thing. You make a YouTube video, what is that going to do? But actually, there are cases there seems to be a lot of interesting correlative, evidence that suggests that they do something. And I've actually gone out of my way and gathered 10 representative cases of where pressure in the form of either YouTube videos at Atajurt or just information or fixing to reporters supplied by Atajurt has actually helped get some sort of response from the Chinese authorities. In some senses, even so far as to get these people released, or even to get them back to Kazakhstan. And so here I'm going to kind of present them very quickly, hopefully. So the first is this case of again, and I put the number in the number corresponds to the entry in shahid.biz in case you want to read the whole story, or as much of it that we have. But so entry 123 is Razila Nural. And so her case is, she's this young woman who basically went back to Xinjiang in, let's see, I think it was mid 2017. And she was eventually taken to a camp. She was there for a while, and then she was transferred to a factory. And so Atajurt helped provide information for her. Her mother, basically, I think towards the end of last year, there was a period that her mother was going to the Atajurt office and making petitions almost every day, making video appeals, almost every day or every other day. It was quite a lot. She was basically a frequent visitor. And so Razila's story it was published in this piece. I'll show one of them, and this is this is the New York Times piece by Chris Buckley and Austin Ramsey. And so they covered how people were leaving these camps now to be transferred to factories, where they would work for basically very, very low wages. And Razila's case was kind of loud, so the New York Times and the Financial Times both published reports about these factories and mentioned her case on December 16th, 2018. AP News also wrote about them and also mentioned her case on December 19th. And according to her mother, on December 23rd, so less than a week later, she was released from a factory. And on January 4th, so another week and a half later, she actually called her mother. And this was after 1.5 years of absolute silence, of nothing, of no news. So there. So that's an example of where the fixing by Atajurt and the public pressure, the media pressure, again, was quickly followed by some sort of response. I'm not going to say, I cannot prove to you that one causes the other, obviously. So all I can show you is kind of these correlations. This happened, and then suddenly this happened, and it seems like a very interesting coincidence. So this is Nural's case, case number 153, Muluk Qasim. In his case, what was interesting was that his wife, Turan Tulubai, was making a lot of videos, and at one point she went to Korgas, to the boundary, this kind of this visa-free zone between China and Kazakhstan, to try to see him. And she was, this is somebody who got his documents confiscated in China in December 2016. She went there in November 2018 to try to see him, and she was apprehended for a few hours. And one of the things that the Chinese police actually brought up in the conversation with her were her video appeals on social media, according to her, again. And then on the same month, at the end of the same month, on November 23rd, we have her husband actually calling her and asking her to stop her video appeals and even threatening to divorce her if she doesn't. So again, he's still there. He's not free. But again, it is an example of, where an action was quickly followed by an action on the Chinese side, strangely enough. And again, I'm actually showing you the photos here as well, in part because I want to convey that this is, kind of to illustrate that these are real people, to show that they have faces next to the names, and in part sort of as a sort of warning to any Chinese authorities who might want to be watching this video, in case you do. Again, these are people, these are not statistics. We're not stupid. We know what's going on, we know what you're doing. So again, these are not people, these are people, these are not statistics. We have their photos. In many cases, we have their Chinese ID numbers, and if anything happens to them, you will pay for that. So that's part of the reason why I'm showing these photos. Now, case number 277, Tursunbek Kabeoli. So this is a person who went back to China and got his documents confiscated in September of 2017. He actually recently returned to Kazakhstan, but during his stay, he was called to the police quite a few times, and on 3 different occasions, this kind of petitioning of video appeals from Kazakhstan were according to him, were brought up by the local police. So he was called by the police in June of last year because his children in Kazakhstan had petitioned, according to him. There was another time he was called and questioned because his wife in Kazakhstan, who was actively petitioning for him and making video appeals, reported that her mother was detained in Xinjiang, so his mother-in-law, and reported that her brother in Xinjiang, so his brother-in-law, had committed suicide. So she reported this, and the police apparently took notice. And then he had another time where he said he stayed 1 week in a detention center, and as he left, before he was released, one of the things the police supposedly warned him about is to get his family in Kazakhstan to stop petitioning for him. So again, another case. And now he's actually back in Kazakhstan, as of, I think, about a few weeks ago. Another case, number 471, Jarkenbek Hasan Kadir. So not much here, but he was detained in March. He was a very kind of bright figure, as I figured from talking to his brother. He was detained in March 2017. March 2018. And after his brother's video appeal in fall of 2018, so quite a few months later, the next day the police visited his family's house in Xinjiang. So maybe a coincidence, who knows? And he was actually released to house arrest in February last month, so February of this year. Number 507, so Sanya Saud Khan. So this is somebody who got her documents confiscated in August 2017. Her son in Kazakhstan, Margulan, started petitioning, video appealing for her almost a whole year later, in August of 2018. And he says a week after he started this, the local police called his mother to tell her that they would issue her a new passport soon. Again, coincidence or not, it's up to you. On December 29th, there was another incident, December 29th, 2018, so just before the new year. Margulan uploaded another video, according to him, at 6 in the morning. And just a few hours later, he got a call. They got a call from his mother in Xinjiang, from all of these local Kazakhstan numbers, through all of these local Kazakhstan numbers, in which she basically told them, she was pleading, begging them to stop appealing for her. And actually, she returned to Kazakhstan about 2 weeks ago. So, another case. This case, number 1337, 1337, Nahama Sultan Murat. So this is somebody who got her documents confiscated in August 2017. She was actually arrested 2 days after her husband made a video appeal on January 6, 2019. But she was released 3 days later and allowed to return to Kazakhstan 10 days later. So she also made it back to Kazakhstan at the end of January, not long after her husband's appeal. Another case, and here I don't have a good photo, sorry. Number 1358, Nurlan Koktuobay. So he is actually, this is two people, this is him and his wife. So both of them had their documents confiscated in 2017. Nurlan also spent some time, a few months, I think maybe even, over half a year in a camp. And after their children made their second video appeal in the fall of 2018, so over a year after they had gotten their documents confiscated, or one in Nurlan's case been detained, suddenly Nurlan and his wife apparently called their children very soon after they made their video and told them to stop appealing. And actually a few weeks ago they also made it back to Kazakhstan again. And this is a really interesting case. So 1391, Rizgul Kurman Ali. So she was arrested and put in camp in October 2017. As I understand, she was in camp that whole time. Then on November 6, 2018, her husband, after I think not doing very much, makes a video appeal, and one day after his appeal, she's actually released. He gets news that she's been released from camp. Again, coincidence or not, up to you. These are not proofs, but still, very interesting coincidences, very interesting correlations. What's funny here is that now police are apparently threatening her that she won't be able to return back to Kazakhstan because of her husband's appealing, even though it seems that his appeal originally forced her release, in any case. But even that by itself shows that the authorities are reacting to these things. Here's another case. So 1396, this is Kuneke Janibek. She was in a camp, then a factory, then another factory apparently. She was in the carpet factory first, then I think she went to an airplane towels factory. And where I think she still is. So her sister in Kazakhstan, Aybota, has been petitioning for her recently. And now she says after she started petitioning, both her sister and her father in Xinjiang have been contacting her to tell her to stop doing it. So again, they're not free, but at least you could see that there's a reaction. And finally, the last case I'm going to bring up is that of Dina Ambir, so 1878. So Dina Ambir, she's the young Kazakh paintress, so apparently quite famous. She was among the Kazakh youth. She studied at the Xinjiang Arts Institute, and this is someone who's supposedly detained in April 2018. Her relatives only started talking about her and petitioning for her, I think, after not long. Basically, the first time I heard about it was when Atajurt went to Taldykorgan, which is another city here in Kazakhstan where there's a lot of Oralman, a lot of Chinese Kazakhs, and that's kind of when the story first got broken. There were photos of her paintings that were made public. Then people, there was a video appeal. There was a Radio Free Asia story that came out about her, almost a day or two later. And a week or two after this, she called to say that they got a call from her from Urumqi, after months of nothing. They got a call from her from Urumqi saying that I'm in my parents' house, everything is fine. Whether or not that's true, well, probably not. But on January 19th, they reported that she had actually been released from camp. So another case of, so this is 10 cases that I picked out that, I found very quickly. This is not comprehensive. I think there's probably, if I searched, I searched my database for these, but if I searched in more detail, I could probably find more, and probably 20, 30, and just a lot of other anecdotal evidence too that, stuff happens when you do this. So that was a very, very long kind of digression for how Atajurt has helped apply this, systematically, consistently apply public pressure, and how this seems to have yielded some results instead of just kind of this quiet diplomacy with China, which it's questionable if that yields many results or not. Also, they've been very helpful for general coverage, and I can say that personally, just as the director of my database, there probably would not be a Shahed.biz without Atajurt, because a lot of the useful data that's in there comes from their work, from their public testimonies, and that's helped a lot. And I don't think it's helped just me. I mean, it's more and more people are starting to use this tool, and I encourage more people to use it. And a lot of the useful data in there is due to them, and for that I'm grateful. But also, again, if we come back to this story, for example, about the forced labor, this story, both from AP News, Financial Times, New York Times, this, it doesn't rely only on information from Atajurt. They also look at, Kashgar, they look at Khotan, not just northern Xinjiang, but all of the testimonies, kind of all of the witnesses who say that we have relatives in these factories, that essentially, this story relies on that, and all these reporters, talked very heavily and with Atajurt, and they came, to AP News and New York Times came to Almaty to interview people that were arranged by Atajurt to write the story. So again, without Atajurt, we wouldn't be breaking these news about labor factories. I mean, a lot of that information, a lot of the evidence, again, comes from them. And so there's just a lot of this general coverage that would not have been possible without their efforts and without all of their documentation. Another kind of more abstract, but I think very important aspect is that they've actually been teaching people to speak up. So what's kind of amazing is that they were doing it actually, no, they were still doing it recently, and it's something they've been doing for a while, is going to different towns, as I mentioned, different towns, kind of these boondocks of Kazakhstan, and finding people there that who have relatives in some sort of detention in Xinjiang, who are relatives of victims, and teaching them to speak out, saying, you can make a video appeal, you can petition to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you can do something to change the situation. You don't have to just accept it. You don't have to sit here quietly and just say, kind of sigh and say, oh, what can I do? So they actually went around and taught people to speak up. They told people to make their own video appeals. They taught people to get together, to give interviews, to talk to journalists. They set people up with journalists. And so they've done so much to kind of create this, empowerment, to allow people to actually do something, to try to change the situation. And people who normally wouldn't know that you could do that, because there are people who live, again, in the boondocks of Kazakhstan. They aren't familiar with social media. They aren't familiar with foreign journalists. They don't know how to contact them. They don't know if that will make any difference. And Atajur just comes and kind of explains that, yes, this can work. And so they've done that. I've been on one of these trips very briefly as well, and it's very good work that they've done. And more, another case of that, but kind of more internationally, has been with Kyrgyzstan. So actually in Kyrgyzstan, the activists there, I mean, they're still kind of forming, but the newly formed activists there, as of last year, basically started speaking up because of, in many ways, Atajurt. I met with a lot of those activists. I asked them why, what got you to speak up? A lot of them said, well, we lost patience because we had relatives, who were in camps for a year or two and nothing was happening. We didn't know what was going on, so we just couldn't stand that anymore. But a lot of them said, well, because we saw what Atajurt was doing. They were watching them on YouTube, and one of them, a few of them went to Almaty, and they also gave interviews. They did these video appeals. And that kind of, so this little wave of activism that formed in Kyrgyzstan is actually probably would not have formed without Atajurt either, again. So that's another one of their achievements. And finally, kind of, the last thing I have that I wanted to mention is, they've also done a lot kind of in emergency situations. So you had a few interesting cases where, for example, again, we come back to Omar Bek. This is already kind of Omar Bek as the family man, not Omar Bek as the ex-detainee, but, his family was trying to travel to Turkey to meet him, and they were at first not allowed into the country. There was talk that they were going to be sent back to Kazakhstan, so it was kind of worrisome for a while. And I don't know all the mechanisms that work behind this, but Atajurt, again, I was in the groups where they were talking about this. Atajurt did do his part to try to publicize this case and to make it known and to get people to write about it. Another case was more recent this year. So this was another Kazakh, a Chinese Kazakh, who managed to make it all the way to Uzbekistan and was in the Uzbekistan airport, Kalimbek Shahman, who basically ended up in the Uzbekistan airport and was not allowed to enter Uzbekistan, and they were threatening to basically deport him, and there was fear that they were going to deport him to China. And so again, this I was getting messages about this guy, just when this thing was happening, and that was again because of Atajurt, because Serikjan was forwarding me the messages. He was forwarding them to a lot of other people, I'm sure, and telling people, write about this, do something about this, and so they played a role in that as well. I actually don't know what happened to him now. Last I heard was that he did end up getting deported to Thailand, but apparently the UN, some UN Committee for Refugees or something like that, took control of him, or started to look after him. I don't, but there's been no news of him for over a month, so I hope he's fine. But at least it did raise his case. He did make the press, and again, that's their achievement in part. And finally, this story with again about the labor factories, and this is for Gulzara Al-Khan, who has been written about more recently by a few of the major media outlets. So this is a woman who actually messaged her husband almost on shortly before the new year to tell him that they were trying at the factory, that she spent about a year in a camp and then a few months at a factory, and so at the factory they were trying to force them to sign 1-year contracts to work there. And so after that, and I think they were threatening to send them back to camp if they didn't sign. And so after she heard this, she contacted her husband in Kazakhstan. He started to make video appeals. He started to publicize, and Atajurt did a lot to kind of help him do that. Again, to get reporters to talk to him, to his wife. Radio Free Asia published the story, almost immediately. And actually, she came back to Kazakhstan just about a week later. She was released from the factory about a day later. And she came back to Kazakhstan about a week or so later. So again, Atajurt was quick to react on that as well. So kind of these quick reactions in emergency situations are things that they've done as well. So having said all that, that was a very long review of what they've done, but I hope it's been convincing. Again, you don't have to listen to me for all of this. You can just look at the transcript, and hopefully that's easier. So having said all that, I want to talk about Serikjan, and this hopefully won't be as long because it's just one person, though it's a very bright person. So Serikjan, I want to kind of do 3 things here. First, I want to kind of clarify a few things, that basically tell you what he is not and what I think he is from knowing him. Then I want to review maybe, and again, it's not my right to really judge. I don't want to say downsides, upsides. A lot of people's characteristics are two-way streets, they're double-edged swords. So some of the things that people don't like about him may also actually, in fact, be necessary for a lot of the good things he does. So but I will say in a few things that can drive you a bit nuts with him, maybe the not so great things about Serikjan, and then I will end with saying things where I think he's absolutely right and where I agree with him and where I think he's actually a very valuable leader and a very good just human being for doing what he's doing. So first, to clarify, the Kazakh press, the state Kazakh TV, and these recent campaigns have tried to portray him as a jihadist. Serikjan is not a jihadist. I will swear to that. Happily, not at all. I've never heard him say anything jihad related, and as I understand, his bright speech of saying this is jihad against the soulless, was taken out of context, and there were other sentences there that were basically saying jihad is not picking up a weapon and going to Syria. It was he was talking about informational jihad, and there's also the more general definition of jihad that most people don't know that also needs to be taken into account. So anyway, I won't go into all that. I will just say from knowing the guy, he's not a jihadist. So I just want to set the record clear there. Another one is that people might say, well, is he really committed to this? Does he really care about the Kazakhs? I will say this. As a person who's now working on the Xinjiang issue 24/7 for quite a long time, and who has tied his fate basically to the fate of Xinjiang in many ways, I will say that I recognize in him another person who works on Xinjiang 24/7 and who has tied his fate to Xinjiang up to the point that he's risking arrest and imprisonment for doing what he's doing. So I do think that he is true to what he's doing. I do think he believes in it. That's been my impression. I think he cares. I don't think there's a big ulterior motive. Now, you might say he has personal goals. You might say he has personal ambitions. He might want to go into politics. He's trying to use this to build his political career. Whether that's true or not, maybe it is. I still don't think that's the main driving point. There's many ways to build a political career. If only every person who had big political ambitions, built them the way that Serikjan has built them with doing all the work that he's doing. That's all I can say. Honestly, if this is how selfish ambitions get realized, then by all means, let's all be selfish and let's realize our ambitions by trying to fight for the victims in Xinjiang. No problem for me there. But honestly, I don't. I do believe that he's quite true to this cause. I think he believes in it. I think he's trying to do everything he can. Ulterior motives or not, honestly, I don't care because of what he's doing and what he's done. Now, things about Serikjan that might annoy people or that might get him into trouble, might get others into trouble, and things to watch out for that I just want to, these are my impressions. Serikjan is definitely a performer. So he's, if you give him a microphone and or a stage, I don't think he needs both. He just needs either a stage or a microphone. If you give him one of those two things, he can go and say all kinds of things. And he's a very talented orator, for better or worse. And where he does run a danger, and I will admit this, is that he can definitely exaggerate, as a lot of activists can. He can exaggerate facts, or he can, he can kind of say things that haven't been fact-checked, and this can be a problem. It's something that annoys me, but it's a problem he runs into. So there is that. Another point about him is that he does tend to be very kind of black or white, let's say paranoid. So everything kind of that goes wrong can be explained with Chinese soft power. So if he gets into a car accident, then it was Chinese soft power. It was the Chinese trying to kill him. If the computers break down in the office, it's Chinese soft power. It's a Chinese virus attack or something like that. So if the weather's bad, it's Chinese soft power as well. Maybe not so much, but still, it's he's that kind of person. And this kind of black and white thing, it takes out the middle ground sometimes, which can be also a problem because people that he doesn't agree with, indeed he can accuse them of being Chinese soft power, and that can be a problem because he can lose allies this way. So that's another thing about him I think I almost wish that wasn't there. So, having done this stuff for a while, I'm also tempted sometimes to blame Chinese soft power for things that I really probably should not blame Chinese soft power for. So in some sense, I can understand him, but still. And of course, he's being a very bright figure. He does have an ego. He does have a narcissistic side, and that can be hard to work with as well. So, if you give him a microphone, he'll just go and he'll say all sorts of things. He won't think, he may not reflect so much on, who that might offend or what people might think. And also just working with him, there's quite a lot of times when he believes that what he's doing is so important that he'll just, he'll message you and he'll say, okay, well, hey, do this for me. And it won't be like, do this for me, I'll pay you, or, translate this for me, edit this for me. He'll just say, oh, do this for me, and that can be, it's a bit of not taking into consideration other people's time. So there's that side to him, which is also can be a pain sometimes. So that's kind of, that's of all the kind of the negative sides of Serikjan that people complain about, these are mine, personally. That's what I can say. But now to end on the positive sides. And why I don't think he should be arrested, and why I think he's somebody that we really need to fight for. Because in many ways, I think he is. You can call him a hero. He's done a number of very, very good things. And so one of the things is that he's extremely energetic. And I think this is extremely important for what he does, because if you go into an Atajurt office, not these days now that it's been locked, but if, say, a few weeks ago, and I think all the foreign journalists who have gone there and who have worked with them and who have met with the relatives of the victims there have had this experience. Is you go in there and you sit down for hours and you talk to one family member of one relative of a victim, then you talk to another, then you talk to another, then you talk to another. I had this experience towards the end of New Year, right before the New Year, when I was there to kind of interview some people for the foreign policy piece that I was writing. And that day, I thought we had talked to 10 people. When I counted later, it was actually 20, and we spent something like 5 or 6 hours there. It was probably one of the most tiring days of my life, because and I think other reporters will will agree who have been there. You sit down there, and people come kind of in turns to talk to you, and it's all of these horrible stories. Like, my mother was jailed for 15 years for praying. My wife is in a camp, and she's sick. She had surgery. She needs medical attention, and they're not releasing her from the camp. What do I do? Write about her, get her released. It's all these people who want your help, that you can't always help because there's just too many. There's just too many of them, and you can't write about every single one, and not every one of those stories is going to get China to release those people. So you do what you do, but you have to listen to all of these stories, and you do your best, and you listen, and you talk to them, and then you talk them through it. You try to get all the details, and at the end you say, okay, we'll do our best to help. And then you go on to the next person, and you hear their story, and then you just become desensitized to the whole thing. And it's really, really tiring, that experience. And Serikjan does this every single day almost. He's in that office every single day, talking to people, recording interviews. Even if not himself, he's still present in some sense, or driving to other towns and meeting people there and recording interviews with them. It is emotionally, it's just such painstaking work, and you need a lot of energy to do that, and he has that energy. And that's another thing that's just amazing, is that he's in that office, and he can keep going. And I don't think, in his place, I care so deep. This is something that I care about extremely deeply, but I'm not sure if I could do that every single day. I'd probably die. I don't know, just meeting with people every single day and just listening to story after story after story. It's bad enough reading about them every single day, story after story after story. Actually meeting with them and sitting with them, and realizing these are not liars. These are not people who are trying to somehow abuse their opportunity to talk to a foreign reporter to get something out. These are people who actually have relatives in really, really bad situations. And hearing that every day, it's tough, but he can do it. And that's that's something that he should be lauded for. He's also extremely creative. That's another thing. He's since basically taking control of the group fully, I would say, towards the end of last year, he's moved them to a bigger office to try to get more rooms to kind of do videos in parallel. Then he moved them to yet another office to do even more stuff. And he was always thinking, like, he would message me, once every week or two before, and he would say, like, oh, Zhenya, I have this idea, let's make a documentary. I want you to, of course, it would be like, you do all the work, or like, I'll have this idea, do the work for me. And so often I would say, Serikjan, I'm not your volunteer. You can't tell me to do this stuff. But he would still have these ideas where he would say, like, now I want to, hire a Western documentary maker to make a documentary about all these relatives of the work that we're doing. I want to get the Tajiks involved. The Tajiks from Tashturgan are in camps too. So how can we? How is it possible for us to get Tajiks in Tajikistan who know them to speak out about them? Kyrgyzstan, all these, how do we get more, Hui into these testimonies? He was always thinking up of ways to kind of expand, to make things more effective. At one point, they started making their own database. They wanted to create a database kind of like Shahid.biz. That was electronic, and and do it in a way that they could send the info to, I don't know, the UN or somebody in Europe, on a daily basis. They wanted to do that as well. Those tons of ideas. Getting testimonies in 6 or 7 languages. That was another thing. Honestly, were all of these great ideas, did all of them work? Of course not. But some of them did, and some were important. But the fact that he was always trying to develop and always trying to create, and that was good. And along that same line, the other thing that he did that I think is really good is that he tried to get everybody involved. So at the beginning, this was really a Kazakh thing, and he himself is very nationalistic. He's Kazakh. But, he understands. I think he understood that, this is a battle that has to be fought by everybody together. And so at one point in the last few months, even though, a lot of, there are, for example, Kazakh-Uyghur tensions in Kazakhstan, and a lot of, to put it bluntly, a lot of the Kazakh volunteers in Atajurt are not very keen on having Uyghurs coming there. So there is that unfortunate barrier, which I think needs to disappear, but it's there. And Serikjan stood for this. He said no, they should come, and then he had Uyghurs come, he had Uyghurs testify, and then he tried to explain to everybody. He wanted to get he already got the Kyrgyz, he got the Uyghurs, he wanted to get the Tungans, the Hui involved, he wanted the Tajiks, he wanted, if there were Christians, he wanted to get the Christians. If there were Han Chinese who were somehow suffering this, he was okay with them coming in and testifying as well. So he was, over the past month or two, he really started pushing this, and the local the local Kazakhs who didn't like him started use that chance to accuse him. So they said that he's now he's working with the Uyghurs now, he supports Uyghur independence now, he's and he still went on, and he still continued to do this, and even if though members of his own group weren't always very keen on it. And in that sense, I support him completely. I mean, this issue is too big. It's a horrible time to look at ethnic differences. I mean, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Uyghur, who the hell cares? We're all in this boat together, so it doesn't matter anymore. Just work together, just support each other. And I think he saw that, he understood that, because otherwise you're not going to win. And the other thing that, again, where I really, really respect him, is that he's willing to take risks. So he's willing, what I would say, I would call it riding the red line. So suppose that, you have the red line over here. Yeah, I'm going to try to put this properly in the camera. So you have this is the red line, which we don't really even know where it is usually. And this is us, let's say. And the red line is, suppose that you start criticizing the Chinese government, you start trying to take action against the Chinese government, and at one point you go too far, you go over, and this is when the Chinese government does something bad to you. So they jail, if they can jail you, they jail you. If they can put your relatives in jail, they jail your relatives, and it's a line that everybody is afraid of. So the majority of us, I would say, this is the red line, this is us, we stay like here. We don't go up very close to the red line. We don't even try. In fact, we just stay here because we're afraid. We're afraid that, liking a post on Facebook, resharing a post critical of China's policies in Xinjiang is going to put us all the way over here. And then China's going to come back, and, if we've been to Xinjiang before, we were friends there, they're going to punish everybody that we know. It doesn't work that way, as practice has shown. I mean, in practice has shown, you can actually get closer and closer to this red line gradually, kind of see what the reaction is. If there isn't, you can get closer and closer. And we often, this is kind of a personal aside, we often blame, it's very easy to blame somebody if they speak out and get people in trouble. We say, why did you do that? Why didn't you keep silent? You have friends there, your relatives there, you spoke out, and now they're jailed because of you. Good job. We can blame people for that. We never blame people for staying here instead of, say, here. We never blame people for not taking the risk. Although the amount of stuff that they could do if they did take the risk could actually be very, very significant and could actually save lives. Abstractly. I mean, we don't know which lives we save by taking those risks. We know who we endanger if we cross the red line. We don't know who we save by trying to work more efficiently closer to the red line. And Serikjan, I think, understood this. Of course, he could have kept Atajurt as kind of a vanilla organization that played by the rules, kind of where he didn't go out of line and get out of line or say anything crazy. But he kept pushing. The authorities warned him. The authorities told him, that stop your activism, don't do this, and he just ignored them. They've been telling him this for like a year. They were threatening him. They were interrogating his relatives, and he just ignored them. He kept going. He kept pushing out there. He kept developing it. He kept making it bigger. He kept meeting with more foreign journalists. And in so doing, he accomplished more. Question is, has he crossed the red line? We don't know. I'm actually still not sure that he has. He might still be here. We might still be able to get him out. We might still be able to get Atajurt out. But the point, what I really respect him for, is him taking this willingness to explore, to try to push himself as far as he can. And I think this is because he understands that, he's doing this for real. He's not doing this for play. He's not doing this to be able to say, okay, these things are horrible, and I did everything I could. I did something to try to stop them, so I can sleep easy at night. I didn't contribute to the mess. I tried. I actually did a few good things. He's not doing it to be able to say that. I don't think he's doing it to actually win. He's doing it to try, he understands that if you're going to win against China on something this big and this horrible, you have to push yourself to the limit, to the safe limit without that crossing. You have to take the risk. You have to sacrifice things. Otherwise, you're not going to accomplish anything substantial. And again, this is a guy with a Kazakh passport in Kazakhstan, running around and doing all this and exposing himself to all of this danger, despite the fact that anyway. So I think I respect him for doing that. I think it's something I wish more people would do as well, to take more risks, to be ready to sacrifice more, because again, doing things quiet, and this is just my opinion, of course, but I think it's backed empirically as well by how silly China is in reacting with its PR when people say bad things about it. China does not want a bad image, and if you go out and you become loud, as Atajurt has been, and paint them negatively and speak out, you're going to achieve things. And I think it has achieved things because of that. And Serikjan also took very big risks by doing what he's doing, but I think he's actually, those risks have in many ways paid off. Now I hope, it doesn't cost him his, freedom for the next 10 years. So that, and of course, the last thing that, of course, you have to respect him for, and I think I already kind of basically said this, is that he's obviously got guts. So he's brave. I mean, it's if somehow he manages at the end to escape, on a plane and leaves, and it turns out that he was a project of the West or something like that, then we can say, oh, okay, then I guess he was never in any real danger to begin with. But I think the past events show that when he says that he's in danger, he's actually in danger, and despite this danger, he kept going. He kept again trying to push the red line. He tried to do everything he could without killing himself, and now he's gotten himself into this very bad situation, and again, I hope we can get him out. So having said all that, having now talked about Serikjan for a while as well, I kind of want to come back to this question of, okay, now what now? So we've gone through these phases where media coverage of Xinjiang has gone up and up and up, and has now started to materialize into actual action. But to keep this action up, we're going to need more information, of course. So what Atajurt has been doing, what they're campaigning, this needs to keep going. Otherwise, if it dies out, then all the other initiatives, I think, are going to have a lot of difficulty continuing it. Because how are we going to hold China accountable for things if we don't have proof? When you have hundreds of relatives saying that, my father, my son, my wife, whoever is in a camp, here I have WeChat recordings of them telling me that they're being taken away, when you have hundreds of relatives going out and publicly speaking about this, China is not going to be able to deny that, and international organizations are going to have some serious evidence to go to China with. If now we stop, if again we go silent, and Atajurt has been perhaps the big beacon of light, not just in Central Asia, certainly in Central Asia, but even in just the rest of the world, if they suddenly go silent and nothing replaces them, then we're in trouble. So I think there's a few things that, again, I'm calling on people to do here in this very long video, which is now has now run over an hour. This was not my intention. First, let us do what we can to fight for Atajurt and for Serikjan. We fight for Atajurt specifically because that's what matters. We fight for Serikjan, I would say, mostly out of respect, because I'm sure he understands. I'm sure he does not want us wasting our resources fighting for him. But I think that, out of respect for everything he's done, we cannot abandon him. We have to fight for him, and we have to demand that Kazakhstan act reasonably and transparently, and not do anything ridiculous, which is kind of what they have been doing so far with us. And so we have to demand that, and how we do that? Well, there's always the hashtag, which will appear here. Yep. So there's the hashtag. Use it if you want. On any related messages, obviously, tweet, retweet, do the regular thing. But I mean, try to somehow add your voice to this if you can. This is a much easier battle than the one over Xinjiang with all of China. Pressuring Kazakhstan to not be ridiculous with regard to Serikjan is easier than pressuring China to close the camps. So you have a voice, most of you. Try to use it. Try to use the tools you have. If you want, just make a 20 10, 20, 30-second video, just say, I believe that Serikjan, I am such and such, I believe that Serikjan should be freed, because he should be. And if we lose him, that would be a very big loss. Or I don't know, I believe that Serikjan should be free, and I support what Atajurt is doing. Atajurt should, stay open. Make a video like that. I don't know, write some petitions. There are people who do a lot of this work that I think know what to do much better than I do, so I'm not going to tell you what to do. But do something, because I don't think you understand how important this group has been. I've tried to argue for that, but obviously, this is kind of, I have a first-row perspective on their work, so I'm convinced, perhaps biased, but also convinced that what they're doing has been important. The other thing is that I want to do is I want to call on people abroad, notably, most importantly, the Uyghurs, to try to replicate Atajurt, to create your own little Atajurts. You don't have to call it Atajurt, call it whatever you want, call it the East Turkestan, I don't know, support committee, or whatever you want to call it. But replicate a format where people with relatives in those camps or in Xinjiang who are suffering have documents confiscated, whatever, having their rights abused, although that's probably all of Xinjiang or even all of China, I don't know. Just create these little settings where people can come, once a week or once every few days and just record some interviews. Say, like, oh, the latest news I have from my relatives is that they're in such and such a camp, or that, I tried to get in contact, but I couldn't. I called the police station in my hometown, but they put down the phone. Even these little things matter, because even these little things help us document what's going on. They help us analyze, they help us see what's happening. And they help remind everybody that they're not alone. These are not isolated cases. They're affecting everybody. This is your strength. You have ridiculous strength in numbers because there's so many victims, and you have to use that to your advantage. You have to go. You have to speak out. You have to stop being afraid of speaking out, because it's not going to hurt your relatives. No, I cannot guarantee that. Yes, there might be a few cases where they quote unquote kill the monkey to scare the chicken, or scare the chicken to kill the monkey. Sorry. They might punish a few people intentionally to do that. But even if they do that, then make a freaking media scandal out of that. Publicize that case. Show what China is doing to your relatives. But don't go silent on this. And so make your little Atajurt, make your little organizations all over the world, and come and make videos and stream them and post them and let everybody watch what's happening, because this is how you build awareness for this thing. This is how you remind everybody how important this is, how everybody should be following it. And if you go quiet, then you're going to accomplish nothing. I'm sorry, but you won't. China will just ignore you because it doesn't respect you. China's not afraid of you if they see that you're afraid of them. So please, in case we cannot save Atajurt, we cannot save Serikjan, create your own initiatives, copy them, or create your own, put your own twist on it, whatever, but just do something. It's not as hard as you think. And once you start doing it, you'll see how important it is. And I think Atajurt has shown that. I think Atajurt, I am myself an atheist, so I will not, or I'm not an atheist, but at least I don't believe in the traditional religion, so I don't want to say that this is a God-given organization. But it's a very huge stroke of luck that the world had an Atajurt, that we had this group of people who chose to come together and actually campaign for the Kazakhs and take all of these initiatives, take all of these, get all these ideas, to start campaigning, to make it international, to bring it to everybody's attention. And that's incredibly, incredibly important. They've shown us what you can do, and they've shown results, and they've shown how the Chinese state reacts to these results, and it has not been negative. It's been generally positive. And that is why you should absolutely, keep it going in whatever way you can. And please, please, please consider that. Because that's probably the biggest thing you can do as a victim, is to voice what's happening to you again and again and again, on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, to the point where everybody's annoyed, but they cannot ignore you, because they cannot ignore what's happening. But you have to force people to pay attention to it. If you just go quiet, people will ignore it. So yeah, I think we should, because Atajurt, quite frankly, again, like I said, I think this is the biggest, this is probably the most important group in the world with regard to that issue. There's not a lot of people I can say that about, but honestly, with them, I bow down and I respect incredibly everything that they've done. Their courage, their initiatives, it's unparalleled in my opinion. And so we can't let all that go to waste. I don't think people understand how much we will lose if we go to waste, and I don't think people understand where we would be if they had never existed. We would still be at that stage where we would be writing about the police state or the contours. We wouldn't actually understand all of these little details. We wouldn't be able to take China to book about all those little details. But now we can, and we have them to thank for that. But if they disappear, it's all for nothing. If we don't replicate them, if we don't create a replacement, it's all for nothing. So please, that is what I will end this very long video with. Please, please, please do something, because this is a very crucial juncture. And if we lose here, it's going to be a very huge setback, and it's going to be, quite frankly, a lot of lost lives. So that's my video address. I hope it's my first. I hope it's my last. It took much longer than I thought, but if you watched all this or if you read all this, then thank you for your attention. And it is now midnight, well, 12:32 Almaty, now March 17th. I'm Jim Bunin. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reading. All the best.